So now that we've defined the difference between combos and spreads, let's take a deeper dive into spreads. So the first thing is a spread is going to limit the amount of premium spent, but at the expense of limiting your upside. So if you think about that, if you're trading just a single leg option, sometimes the premium could be expensive. And a spread allows you to spend less, but also cap your upside. And that actually might be advantageous depending on where you think the stock is going to go. The next thing is that when you collect premium, you have limited downside risk. So remember, whenever you're selling naked options, you could have a large amount of risk depending on where the stock goes. Having a spread on, though, you're going to have limited downside risk, which is going to allow you to sleep well at night. And then lastly, spreads can potentially enhance your return. So depending on what your portfolio is looking like, you could actually bet on more upside with a spread and do this cost effectively. Also, you could have downside protection for your portfolio, and it could also be cost effective. Now, since we're talking about spreads, let's go ahead and talk about one of the most popular spreads, and that's your debit spread. Now, a debit spread you just need to think about as buying a spread, right? Because you're spending money, so your account is being debited. So let's go ahead and write out what the max gain looks like. So the max gain is going to be the difference in the strikes less the premium spent. So for my example, it's going to be a 100-110 spread that we're talking about. So the difference in the strikes is going to be the difference in 100 and 110. So that's 10 points. And then it's going to be less the premium spent. So in my example, let's say that the premium that we spent was $1. So your max gain is going to be 10 minus the 1 that you spent. So again, your max gain would be 9. Now, let's talk about max loss for a second, because that's the risk, and that's what's really important to know here. And that's literally limited to the amount of premium that was spent. So just like when you buy naked options, the most that you can lose is the premium spent. Same thing happens in a debit spread. So if you're buying the spread, the most you can lose is the premium that you spent. I think the most important thing is the defined risks that you have from the onset. So I have limited upside, but more importantly, I have limited downside. So I can sleep well at night. Now let's talk about credit spreads. A credit spread, I want you to think about, my account is credited, so therefore I'm receiving money. To receive money, you have to sell the spread. So credit spread, think sell the spread. Now your max gain, just like if you were to sell a single leg option, is the premium received. So if you sell a spread, the amount that goes into your account, that is the max that you can gain. Your max loss, or your risk, again, is going to be the difference of the strikes less the credit received. So in my earlier example, if the difference in the strikes are 10, and then you received 1, then your max risk is going to be 9. 10 minus 1. But the most important thing about this spread is that it's also going to have defined risk. And again, we're talking about the same expiration when I go through these examples. So defined risk, I know my upside, but more importantly, I know my downside. So now let's talk about payoffs, because that's one of the fundamental things about spreads that people like. So an easy example would be paying $1 for a 10-point spread. It's a 10-for-1 payoff. Now, we would all love to do that. We'd love to go out, spend $1 in hopes to make 10. But the question you got to ask yourself is, how likely are you going to make money on that spread? Well, it actually might be low probability. And as we go through the course, we'll go into why that might be the case. Now, if you're collecting $3 on a 10-point spread, you're risking 10 to make 3. You might ask yourself, well, why would I ever risk 10 to make 3? Well, maybe the probability is in your favor. And we'll go through that in another lesson as we go through this course. But I want you to start thinking about, if it's got a huge payoff, the probability might be low. If it's got a lower payoff, the probability might be a little higher. So keep that in mind as we go through this course.